On our new Van Halen book, Unchained, a Van Halen User Manual by Martin Popoff. We're going to have that discussion, followed by our extensive conversation with Martin, and it's all coming up next. Take a listen.
I think that if you listen closely to Van Halen's lyrics, and I have written every single one of them, you won't find one sexist lyric. You won't find one victimizing sort of thinking. You won't find that victimization tact of thought.
Hey folks, I'd like to introduce you to the Classic Rock Album by Album podcast. Welcome to the Classic Rock Album by Album podcast, where no stone is left unturned in the show's epic quest to review and dissect every single rock album ever made. Join self-proclaimed rock authorities Chris Carson and Lee Bowie on their epic journey to uncover the true classics. You can find the Classic Rock Album by Album podcast wherever podcasts can be found, including Spotify, Stitcher, Apple Podcasts, and Google Podcasts. Our website address is classicrockalbumbyalbum.libsyn.com. That's LIBSYN.com. And we can be reached on Facebook at fb.me/Classic Rock Album by Album. See you soon from the Classic Rock Album by Album podcast.
If you would like to send us a letter asking a question or making a statement or whatever you'd like to say, you can send it to ddunchainedpodcast@gmail.com.
Hi, this is Ozzy Osbourne. You're listening to Dave and Dave on some fucking show called Unchained, man.
Pick up the top seller Van Halen Rising, how a Southern California backyard party band save heavy metal. The new book by Greg Renoff. Learn about the early history of one of America's most decorated rock bands. Renoff goes deep into the Pasadena roots of the Van Halen brothers, David Lee Roth and Michael Anthony. Go to vanhalenrising.com, where you can get autographed copies of the book, t-shirts, guitar picks, beer koozies, and more. vanhalenrising.com. Also available at amazon.com.
5 hours a night in clubs for years in a row and playing every song imaginable, you can't help but have some of it come into your bones and into your way of thinking.
Okay, folks, and here we are for our deep dive discussion on the new book from Martin Popoff, Unchained, a Van Halen User Manual. Obviously, we love the title because we share it with the podcast. It's the perfect name for the book. A Van Halen User Manual, which, what does that mean, right? Well, I tell you, it really does have a nice flow to it. This is different from most Van Halen books that are out there right now. Martin Popoff, as you will find out after this segment, is an unbelievable author. This guy has 80 books under his belt, and he's not 102. Martin's probably maybe a little bit older than Dave and I. Maybe he's in his early 50s or so. He has just an unbelievable catalog of books that he's written, many of which I've read myself. He has a nice flow to his writing. Well, obviously he's a good writer because he has written 8 books, but he's coming out with a new Queen book, which is called Album by Album. I'm excited for that. But I have read his AC/DC book, Album by Album. He's also done an incredible book on Motorhead, which I really enjoyed. I have his Whitesnake book called Sail Away. I love his Motley Crue Day by Day. That's another favorite of mine. I just got his Montrose book, which I'm excited about, called Rock the Nation. So this guy is a real old school rock author. He gets deep. He's not writing fluff here, guys. So he's not just giving you the basic overview that we've all heard before. Oh, I started on drums, and then my brother picked up my drums while I was on my paper route, and I picked up his guitar. I mean, it's the same old crap. That's not happening here. So Martin's book is very pulpy. Now, it's not glittery and glossy and shiny. It's way more of a strong read. The presentation, it's got a beautiful cover, but I wanted to ask you, Dave, didn't you find it a little strange that Dave and Mike are on the cover and Eddie's not, considering
I think because it's not an authorized book.
What's the difference?
Nothing other than if you're afraid of Ed and Al giving you grief for using them on the cover, you're not going to do that, which I suspect is the reason. But yeah, I do agree with you. I did find it weird that there wasn't one single Van Halen on the cover.
Yeah, but the weird thing is the back cover has this amazing picture of Ed that's sort of like sliced to the side.
Yeah, well, he took the pictures on the front and back cover.
Did he really?
Yeah, because it says it right on the back cover that he took the pictures. So I'm wondering if maybe it was off center to begin with, or he put it to the side so he could have all the promo stuff written on the back and at least slot in a picture of 84 Ed.
Are you sure he took the picture? It says copyrighted.
That usually means, he either took the picture or he owns the picture.
Maybe, yeah, either that. Maybe you know what he could have done, Dave? He could have bought the picture from a photographer who took them, and he has them exclusively for the book. That could be the way.
That could be too, but I'm pretty sure there were some pictures in the book that he had taken when he saw them in Canada.
Okay, all right. I mean, it's a beautiful cover. It's a nice cover with Dave and Mike. It's a nice shot. I just thought it's funny because you think Van Halen, you automatically think Eddie and Al. But anyway, that's fine. But it does have a nice pulpy read. Wouldn't you agree, Dave? It's very dense. It's got a lot of info in it.
If you mean by pulpy, like there's some meat to the bones, and it's not all light and fluffy.
Right.
Yeah, there's some. Yeah. There's some good stuff in there.
Right.
For even the hardcore fans who are like, well, I've read it all. Because Dave and I have read it all.
Right, yeah,
and even when I was done with the book, I was like, oh, yeah, that's interesting.
Right.
I didn't know that. As you'll hear in the interview, oh, hey, that's an interesting perspective. Mm-hmm. I don't share it, but he makes a good point.
Yeah, so, he does. Yeah. He does make interesting points, and he does have a nice perspective. In addition to that, and most importantly, he has a great way of making everything flow. All right, let's just tell you to start off. He goes album by album, but he gives a nice background. He obviously does a little intro himself, but he gets into this interview with Mike Kelly, which is an extensive interview. And Mike is a musician from back in the day, right, Dave?
Yeah, he was there on the early Van Halen scene before they were signed.
Right. So he was there, witnessed the whole thing, and they get into this really in-depth interview with Mike Kelly, who knows Ed and Alan, all these guys. He really paints a beautiful and very detailed picture as to what was going on with Van Halen. And what was so interesting about it, and let me tell you something, there's plenty of times where, like I said, Dave and I are Van Halen fanatics. We've read all the books and the website, this and that. Plenty of times I picked up, I was like, oh shit, I didn't know that, or oh, that's a nice little nugget. There was nice little nuggets, and what we're going to do with this particular discussion here is I'm going to point out a few nuggets here and there to give you guys a taste as to what the book is about, and then of course we're going to get into our interview with Martin after that, but to give you a little flavor and a little meat as to what's going on in the book. There's lots of cool stuff, but the nice thing about this Mike Kelly interview, which kicks off the book, he gives the interesting position that Van Halen was in when they were coming up. These guys were like hard rock guys when hard rock was going out, which was such an interesting position. Like, here Eddie's coming up, this unbelievable, like, technically advanced guitar player, but all of the rock of the 70s was getting washed over with disco and punk and new wave and all this stuff, and yet Van Halen's coming in like waving the flag for hard rock, and it was like almost like they had passed their time, and Mike was kind of painting that picture a little bit, which I found so interesting. They literally almost missed the boat.
Yes.
Yeah, but what actually happened is I kind of look at it like Van Halen jumped on the end of the boat and then kind of turned the boat into their own thing because they really ushered hard rock into the 80s. Van Halen is a late 70s band. Their roots are in the 70s. However, they're very much known as a hard rock band of the 80s, let's be honest. I mean, they have 2 albums in the late 70s, but they're really known as an 80s hard rock band, because when you think of the 80s, I mean, Van Halen is obviously one that comes right out rolling off the tongue in terms of hard rock. When you say 70s hard rock bands, people are, obviously they're on the cusp, but people are thinking, Black Sabbath and Zeppelin and all those guys. What did you make of that whole interview with Mike Kelly, Dave?
It was really good, because when I first started reading it, I'm like, I read Greg Renoff's book, Van Halen Rising. Right. What is this guy going to tell me that I didn't read in that book?
Right.
And there was really some interesting perspectives and information he had that were great supplemental information to Greg's book.
Right.
Which, by the way, if you haven't read it yet, you have to read it, because it's must-read info.
Oh, of course. Absolutely.
And I did find that perspective interesting in terms of, hey, Van Halen was basically like 5 years too late to the game.
Yeah.
And because usually with Van Halen, it's like, listen, when they came seemingly out of nowhere, it was disco and it was punk, which I never really bought the punk thing, especially not in the States, because punk never really caught on.
Yeah.
But anyway, the point was that rock was dying, and here's Van Halen coming,
right?
And by some miracle they pull it off. And I think part of the reason they pulled it off is because a lot of the big bands were gone, were dying, were and all that jazz. So it really was interesting that, like, for all intents and purposes, if Van Halen weren't that good, they never would have made it, because they were basically, like you said, trying to fly the flag for a music style that, for all intents and purposes, was on its way out the door.
Yeah. Mike Kelly calls them like a 70s holdover. You know what I mean?
And honestly, like, if it wasn't like for Ed's guitar playing, you could almost see that.
Yeah. And that's the other thing that propelled them. Interesting enough, his perspective, Mike's perspective, was that Eddie was amazing and unreal. Dave was a clone of Jim Dandy.
Yeah, and he was definitely riding that train.
Oh, he hit him hard. And Alex and Mike were solid, good musicians. Okay, so that's where he was thinking, he talked about everything from early demos. He talks about hearing Take Your Whiskey Home as an early demo from the Mark Stone days, if you can believe that.
Right, I think I have that somewhere. Actually.
Yeah, absolutely. And he says that Eddie was really a friendly, humble, self-effacing guy, not a lot of confidence, and he was nervous about playing original material. Meanwhile, I mean, you heard the original material. We know how good it is. He also said Dave was a propellant of promoting the band. He was like a promotion machine, always putting flyers on cars and using marketing to get people going and getting them into the clubs, like the Starwood and Gazzari's and all that stuff. But he said that it came so close that Eddie Van Halen and the rest of the group, they really almost didn't make it. In fact, one thing I found really interesting, and I don't know if you felt the same, but you tell me, he gave me a whole new perspective on the Gene Simmons situation, that after that was over with, Van Halen band felt embarrassed and almost like blown away that they had missed their chance.
Well, that really wasn't new to me, because, I mean, I always thought the same thing. I mean, here's Kiss, one of the biggest bands on the planet.
Oh, sure.
And they can't get you a record contract?
Right.
Like, that's got to be a tough pill to swallow.
Oh, yeah.
Interestingly, I think he said Paul was there that night, too.
Yes.
Which I hadn't read before.
Right. You always hear about Gene. Right. Yeah.
So, I mean, I don't want to give away the whole interview with the guy, but it was definitely one of the highlights of the book.
Right.
So if for no other reason, you should get the book just to read that interview.
Oh, yeah. I'm going to put this out there right now and call this required reading if you are a fan of this podcast, because there's so many nuggets in here. And it reads so nicely. It flows so nicely the way Martin did this. And I'm not saying this just to kiss his ass because he was on the podcast. I'm being honest. Like, I would tell you if it was like, it's good. Like, this is good. Like, if I'm picking it up and being like, and keep wanting to read more and more to kind of find more and more out, it's obvious because I have so many Van Halen books, read so many Van Halen books, and it's got a nice zest to it. Now,
it does. Yeah. It's a nice read.
Yeah.
It's well written. I mean, like we said, there's a lot of meat on it, but it's not dry reading.
Yeah. And it's well put together, almost like like a playlist or a greatest hits. Like it's got everything in one place. So we'll get into it, but I want to know if you were blown away by this. I had no idea that Scotty Ross dated back to 77 when he used to be the sound man for Yesterday and